My son sent me a text to uninvite me from his baby shower because my presence would ruin his wife's aesthetic vision for the photos. He sent this text exactly 48 hours after I wrote a check for $28,000 to fund their custom Italian nursery furniture. My daughter-in-law had no idea that her demand for a picture-perfect afternoon was about to cost her the luxury condo she lived in, the lifestyle she flaunted, and the marriage she treated like an endless line of credit. Before I walk you through the exact steps of her eviction, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to Savage Revenge Stories. Drop your age in the comments below and tell me if you believe that financial support should ever buy disrespect. My name is Jameson Wells. I am 68 years old, and I spent 40 years as a commercial real estate developer in Westport, Connecticut. I build structures designed to endure harsh winters and shifting soil. Through decades of pouring concrete and erecting steel, I learned one unforgiving truth. When a foundation is rotten, you do not waste time patching the drywall. You bring in the demolition crew and you level the site. Sentimentality cannot hold up a collapsing roof. It was a Tuesday morning. The autumn air was crisp and the leaves on the oak trees lining my driveway were just beginning to turn. I sat in my study, the leather of my chair cold against my back, reviewing the final invoice for a vintage wooden rocking chair. It was a flawless replica of the one my late wife Evelyn had used to rock our son to sleep. I had arranged for it to be delivered to their nursery, alongside the imported bassinets and changing tables my daughter-in-law Harper had demanded. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk. I picked it up and saw Liam's name on the screen. The text was long, carefully punctuated, and carried the unmistakable cadence of his wife dictating over his shoulder. "Hey, Dad. Harper and I are finalizing the guest list for the first trimester gender reveal this weekend. We really need the vibe to be highly curated for the photographer. Harper feels like having older family around might shift the energy and cause her unnecessary stress. We think it is best if you sit this one out so she can focus on the aesthetic of the day. Hope you understand. We will send you the gallery link when the edits come back." I read the words twice. The silence in my study felt thick, heavy enough to weigh on my chest. I set the phone down next to the framed photograph of Evelyn holding Liam on her hip. I thought about the thousands of dollars I transferred to Liam's checking account on the first of every month to keep their heads above water. I thought about the $8,000 property tax and homeowners association fees I paid for the luxury condo they currently occupied, rent-free. A lesser man might have replied with anger. A foolish man might have begged for an invitation to his own grandchild's celebration. I did neither. I picked up my pen, signed the bottom of the rocking chair invoice, and instructed the boutique to deliver that single item to my estate instead of their condo. Then I picked up the phone. I did not dial my son to negotiate my worth. I dialed the direct line of my wealth manager. The demolition was about to begin, and I intended to supervise every swing of the hammer. To understand Harper, you must understand the architecture of modern entitlement. She grew up in a household where the driveway featured two pristine, late-model European sedans, while the kitchen drawers hid final notice utility bills. Her parents lived on the razor edge of their credit limits, financing a country club facade through crippling, high-interest debt. They taught their daughter a dangerous lesson early in life. They taught her that the appearance of prosperity is identical to actual wealth. When she married my son, she stepped into an estate built on 4 decades of unyielding discipline and assumed she had simply struck a limitless vein of gold. She mistook my quiet generosity for foolishness. She viewed my money as an aesthetic right, a tool designed to construct her perfect, flawless reality. I pressed a button on my desk console. The line rang twice before my private wealth manager answered. His name is Julian, a man who has managed my portfolios for 15 years. He is accustomed to my brevity in my clinical approach to asset allocation. I gave him a clear, distinct set of instructions. First, I ordered the immediate termination of the Platinum card ending in 472. This was the secondary card linked directly to my primary operating account. I had handed it to Liam 3 years ago for emergencies, a safety net while he established his marketing career. Within months, it had quietly migrated into Harper's designer wallet. Just 4 days ago, I watched a charge clear on that account for $4,000, It was paid to a boutique maternity photographer in Manhattan who specialized in soft-focus golden hour portraits curated for social media feeds. Julian did not ask questions. He confirmed the cancellation with a few rapid keystrokes. The digital umbilical cord was cut. There would be no grace period, no warning text. The plastic in her purse was now nothing more than a useless piece of decorative resin. My next call required a bit more finesse. I pulled up the contact file and dialed the direct number for the luxury infant boutique in Greenwich. A sales associate with a polished, breathless voice answered, eager to assist a client who had recently authorized a $28,000 invoice. I asked her to pull up the order file for Wells. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of her keyboard through the receiver. She cheerfully recited the list of items awaiting shipment from Italy: the hand-carved bassinet, the custom silk draperies, the changing table crafted from reclaimed olive wood. Every piece meticulously selected by Harper to ensure her followers would see the pinnacle of maternal luxury. I let the associate finish reading the exhaustive list. Then, I instructed her to cancel the entire order and process a full refund to my original payment method. The silence on her end was profound. She stammered, her cheerful tone dropping into confusion, reminding me that the items were packed and set to ship in 3 days. I kept my voice perfectly level. I told her the circumstances had changed. I did not offer an explanation because an explanation invites a negotiation, and my mind was closed for business. There was, however, one caveat to my instructions. I told the associate to keep a single item on the invoice active: the vintage wooden rocking chair. It was a modest piece, unadorned and lacking the ostentatious flair of the imported Italian furniture. Harper had only added it to the order because Liam mentioned it reminded him of his childhood. She intended to place it in the corner, a rustic prop for her carefully staged background photos. I instructed the boutique to change the delivery address for that specific chair. It was to be sent directly to my private estate. That chair was an exact replica of the one Evelyn used to rock Liam to sleep during his colicky nights. It represented a legacy of genuine maternal care, of exhausted nights spent nurturing a child out of love rather than social obligation. I refused to let it become a prop in a house where I was no longer welcome. The associate quietly confirmed the modified order and the pending refund. I hung up the phone, feeling the cold satisfaction of a foreman watching a controlled demolition begin, exactly on schedule. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair and closed my eyes. The scent of old paper and furniture polish in my study faded, replaced by a memory sharp enough to cut. I saw Evelyn. Not the polished, confident matriarch she became in her later years, but the young woman I married. I remembered our very first investment property, a dilapidated duplex on the edge of town with a sagging roof and rotting floorboards. We spent our evenings after our day jobs tearing down drywall, our lungs burning from the chalky dust, our hands blistered and raw from pulling nails. I remembered sitting on the bare subfloor with her at midnight, eating cheap instant ramen from paper cups. We ate in the cold draft of a broken window because every spare dollar we earned went into buying copper piping and insulation. Evelyn had smiled at me over that cheap meal, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes bright with the vision of what we were building. We built our wealth brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. We understood the weight of a dollar because we had broken our backs to earn it. We built a load-bearing structure designed to withstand severe storms. Harper wanted the penthouse view without ever looking at the foundation. She demanded a curated, stress-free aesthetic, believing she was owed the fruits of my and Evelyn's labor simply by virtue of marrying my son. She wanted the imported bassinets and the country club brunches, but she possessed none of the discipline required to earn them. She saw my physical presence at a family gathering as an inconvenience, a disruption to her flawless narrative. She wanted the estate, but she wanted the architect erased from the picture entirely. She was about to learn a brutal lesson in structural engineering. When you remove the foundational pillars, the roof inevitably caves in. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the small crystal decanter resting on a mahogany side table. I poured 2 fingers of aged scotch into a heavy glass. The ice clinked sharply in the quiet room. I carried the drink to the tall bay windows of my study. The sun was beginning its descent over the Westport coastline, painting the sky in deep shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. The water caught the fading light, shimmering like a sheet of hammered copper. It was a beautiful, tranquil evening. Inside the walls of my home, everything was secure. The ledgers were balanced, the assets were protected. I took a slow sip of the scotch, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The financial cutoff I had just executed was merely the primer for the dynamite. I could have called Liam. I could have sent a furious text message outlining my withdrawal of support and demanding respect. But anger is a blunt instrument, and a true developer prefers surgical precision. I chose silence. I would let them sleep soundly tonight in the luxury condo I paid for. I would let Harper wake up tomorrow, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her feet had already been hollowed out. I wanted her to discover the empty accounts slowly, out in the world, where her carefully crafted image would take the hardest impact. The digital wires were severed, the funds were locked. Now it was only a matter of hours before she swiped a useless piece of plastic and felt the very first tremor of the collapse. The blockades materialized exactly 48 hours later. It was Thursday afternoon, an unseasonably warm day for autumn in Connecticut. The Cedar Ridge Club is a local institution, a bastion of quiet, generational wealth, where discretion is valued far above display. I have maintained a family membership there for 3 decades. Harper utilized my account frequently, treating it as her personal stage. On this particular afternoon, she hosted 3 acquaintances from her prenatal Pilates class for a late brunch. She chose the terrace seating, ensuring everyone passing by would notice her carefully curated ensemble and the designer bags resting on the spare chairs. To understand the depth of her incoming humiliation, you must visualize the performance she was putting on. She ordered imported sparkling water, truffle-infused omelets, and a round of expensive mocktails adorned with edible orchids. She spoke loudly about her upcoming nursery installation, ensuring her guests understood the exclusivity of the Italian craftsmanship. When the check arrived, presented in a subtle black leather folder, she did not even glance at the total. She simply extracted the platinum plastic from her wallet with a practiced, dismissive flick of her wrist and placed it onto the silver tray. Thomas is a seasoned waiter who has served me for 15 years. He knows the rhythms of true wealth, which meant he recognized the hollow ring of a pretender. He took the folder and walked back to the service station. A few minutes passed. The polite chatter at Harper's table continued, oblivious to the digital wall she had just collided with. Thomas returned to the terrace, but he did not carry the standard receipt and branded pen. He walked with a stiff, measured gait. He stopped directly beside her chair and leaned down. He did not announce the failure to the table. He kept his voice lowered to a discreet murmur, informing her that the terminal had declined the transaction. Harper's practiced smile vanished. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a stark, chalky white before a fiery red flush crept rapidly up her throat. Her friends pretended to be fascinated by the ice melting in their glasses, an awkward silence descending over the previously lively group. Harper snatched the folder back, her manicured fingers trembling slightly. She attempted a light, dismissive laugh, proclaiming it must be a tedious banking error caused by a recent fraud alert. She dug through her oversized tote bag, searching for her own debit card. This is where the illusion shattered entirely. Her personal accounts lacked the liquidity to cover a simple $300 lunch. The polished, affluent matriarch persona evaporated, leaving behind a panicked woman holding empty pockets. With her friends watching in uncomfortable silence, she was forced to excuse herself from the table. She walked briskly into the club lobby, seeking refuge behind a mahogany pillar to dial her husband. She interrupted his workday, demanding he immediately transfer funds or pay the club directly over the phone. The true nature of her financial reality was exposed. If she was the architect of such a flawless, elevated lifestyle, why did a modest brunch require an emergency rescue mission from a mid-level marketing director? Later that evening, the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of my estate. I sat in the dim light of my greenhouse, repotting a few dormant orchids. The damp smell of potting soil and the quiet rustle of leaves provided a calming contrast to the inevitable storm. My phone illuminated on the metal workbench. A missed call icon appeared, followed by a notification for a new voicemail. It was Liam. I pressed play, keeping my hands occupied with the soil. His voice drifted through the speaker, soft and weary. He asked if we could talk, his tone carrying a note of defeat. Hearing that specific cadence sent a brief, sharp pang of hope through my chest. I remembered a rainy afternoon 20 years ago when a 12-year-old Liam walked into my home office, head hung low, to confess he had broken a neighbor's window with a stray baseball. He had sounded exactly like this. For a fleeting second, I allowed myself to believe my son had seen reason. I hoped the embarrassment at the club had forced him to recognize the stark vulnerability of his situation, to see that a marriage built on my hidden subsidies was a fragile, dangerous trap. I washed the dirt from my hands, dried them on a linen towel, and returned his call. He answered on the first ring, but the weary boy from the voicemail was gone. The man on the other end of the line was hostile, his breathing ragged and heavy. The cognitive dissonance required to sustain his marriage had blinded him entirely. Instead of questioning why his wife was spending hundreds of dollars on weekday lunches while they struggled to pay their own utility bills, he aimed his frustration at the easiest target. He demanded to know why I had shut off the card without warning. He accused me of being petty, of harboring a vindictive streak aimed at a pregnant woman. He raised his voice, recounting how Harper had cried in the car all the way home, claiming she felt targeted and unsafe. I listened to his tirade without interrupting. I listened to my own flesh and blood defend a spouse who viewed our family solely as an operational ATM. He was working 60 hours a week, drowning under the pressure of her aesthetic demands. Yet he chose to shield her ego by attacking the very hand that had kept them afloat. When he finally ran out of breath, expecting a defensive argument, I offered him nothing but cold, unyielding truth. I did not raise my voice to match his. I spoke with the calm, measured rhythm of a judge delivering a verdict. I told him that the baby shower text was a clear declaration of independence. Harper had decided my physical presence was an unacceptable burden on her nervous system. I merely agreed with her assessment and removed my financial presence as well. I informed him that real adulthood means financing your own brunch, paying your own invoices, and suffering the consequences of your own rudeness. Liam stammered, attempting to pivot back to the excuse of her hormonal stress. He claimed the text was a misunderstanding, a poorly worded request for space. He was begging me to restore the illusion, to turn the faucet back on, so he wouldn't have to face the terrifying reality of his wife's displeasure. I told him the bank accounts would remain closed. The conversation was over. I disconnected the call and placed the phone flat on my desk. The brief flicker of paternal hope I felt earlier was extinguished, replaced by a crystalline, icy resolve. The initial shockwave of the canceled card was not enough to break the spell. Liam was too deeply entrenched, too fearful of Harper's wrath to stand on his own 2 feet. A subtle lesson was insufficient. The rotten drywall had been stripped away, revealing the decayed studs underneath. I picked up the receiver of my landline. The heavy machinery was required now. I dialed the private residence of Marcus Sterling, my senior litigation attorney. He answered with the crisp professionalism of a man who never truly stops working. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the smooth mahogany surface. I outlined the events of the past few days, detailing the financial severances and the subsequent phone call. Then, I gave him the green light for the maneuver we had kept in our back pockets. I told Marcus to draft the paperwork immediately. The primer had detonated and the dust was settling, but the real demolition was scheduled for dawn. Monday morning arrived with the biting chill typical of late autumn in New England. I was awake long before the sun breached the horizon. I stood in my kitchen, holding a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. At exactly 6 in the morning, a black sedan pulled up to the security gates of a waterfront complex 12 miles away. I knew the precise timing of this arrival because I had orchestrated it with my legal team the prior Friday. The residence Liam and Harper occupied was a sprawling penthouse unit featuring panoramic views of the Long Island Sound. When Liam first proposed, he approached me, seeking a modest loan for a down payment on a starter home. It was a sensible request. However, his new bride balked at the inventory of entry-level houses. She demanded floor-to-ceiling windows, a chef's kitchen she would rarely use, and an address that carried heavy social weight. To shield my son from early marital strife, I purchased the waterfront unit. But I did not place their names on the deed. I am a commercial developer. I protect my investments from unpredictable variables. The property was purchased entirely through Wells Holdings LLC, a corporate entity I maintain for private acquisitions. I allowed my son and his wife to occupy the premises rent-free under a verbal agreement. I covered the $8,000 monthly carrying costs, encompassing property taxes and the exorbitant homeowners association fees. In the eyes of Connecticut real estate law, my son and his wife were not property owners. They were month-to-month tenants at will. The bonded messenger bypassed the complex concierge, having been granted pre-authorized legal access by Marcus. He rode the mirror-paneled elevator to the top floor. He carried a single, thick manila envelope. Inside that envelope was a formal 30-day notice to vacate the premises. He knocked firmly on their heavy mahogany door. According to the delivery log forwarded to me later that morning, Liam answered the door wearing sleep pants, his eyes bleary, confused by the pre-dawn disturbance. The messenger handed over the parcel, captured a digital signature for proof of service, and departed without uttering a single word. The legal clock began ticking the moment Liam took possession of that paper. Connecticut eviction statutes are rigorous, often favoring the tenant in lengthy residential disputes. Harper frequently touted her status as an expecting mother, assuming her pregnancy functioned as an impenetrable legal shield against any consequences. But Marcus is a seasoned litigator who understands the granular nuances of local courts. Harper was barely 12 weeks along. She was hosting a first trimester celebration, a modern invention designed to generate early online engagement. Because she was in the initial stages of gestation and possessing a clean bill of health, no judge in the state would grant her a medical stay of eviction. A medical hardship stay is typically reserved for late-term, high-risk pregnancies or acute physical disabilities. She had no lease, no equity, and no legal standing. The walls she spent 3 years bragging about to her friends belonged entirely to my corporation. At 15 minutes past 6, the silence in my kitchen was shattered. My mobile phone vibrated across the granite island, the screen illuminating with Harper's contact photo. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting it ring 3 times before pressing accept. I did not offer a greeting. Her voice came through the speaker as a shrill, breathless cascade of panic. The polished, quiet luxury persona she cultivated for the country club had evaporated, replaced by a raw, unvarnished hysteria. She demanded to know what kind of monster sends legal paperwork to a pregnant woman before sunrise. She accused me of trying to harm her unborn child through sheer terror, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate bid to regain control of a situation that had slipped through her manicured fingers. She shrieked that I was endangering her health, threatening to call the police to report harassment. I listened to the tirade, keeping my breathing slow and measured. The key to handling a cornered manipulator is to deny them the emotional reaction they are attempting to extract. When she finally paused to draw a ragged breath, I delivered my response with the clinical detachment of a surgeon delivering a prognosis. I reminded her of the text message she had instructed Liam to send me just 6 days prior. I recited her exact phrasing from memory. I pointed out that she had deemed my physical presence at a 3-hour afternoon party far too stressful for her delicate nervous system. I kept my tone flat and conversational. I explained that if a brief social interaction with me caused her such profound emotional distress, then residing inside a property that I legally owned, paid for, and maintained would surely be an unbearable toxic burden on her pregnancy. I told her I was simply accommodating her boundaries. I was removing myself and my assets from her environment to ensure her ultimate peace of mind. The line went dead quiet for a long moment. She realized the trap she had built for herself. I had taken her weaponized therapy language and turned it into an ironclad eviction strategy. When she found her voice again, the self-righteous anger had morphed into a frantic, grasping desperation. She bypassed any defense of her character and zeroed in on the material goods. Her voice cracked as she brought up the nursery. She cried out that the room was currently under construction. She wailed that the custom, imported Italian wallpaper was already halfway installed on the nursery walls. I pictured the expensive, hand-painted paper she had spent weeks sourcing. It was the perfect physical manifestation of her entire existence. It was a beautiful, expensive, superficial layer pasted desperately over a foundational structure she did not build and did not own. She cared more about the optics of an imported wall covering than the stability of the roof over her head. She believed the sheer cost of her decorations would magically grant her equity in my property. I took another sip of my coffee. The sunlight was just beginning to hit the edge of my countertops. I spoke directly into the receiver, making sure every word landed with crisp, undeniable finality. I told her the lease termination was non-negotiable. The premises must be vacated and restored to their original condition by the first of the month. As for her precious imported Italian wallpaper, I suggested she purchase a very sharp scraping tool. She had exactly 30 days to peel it off my walls. I disconnected the call before she could formulate a response. I blocked her number on my personal device, placing the phone face down on the granite. I walked over to the sink and rinsed my mug, watching the dark liquid swirl down the stainless steel drain. The structural demolition was proceeding flawlessly. However, I knew from decades of experience that a desperate tenant never packs up quietly. Stripped of my financial backing and facing the loss of her physical sanctuary, she would not reflect on her actions. She would seek an audience. She would attempt to control the narrative by taking her grievances into the public square, searching for a sympathetic crowd to fight a battle she had already lost in the private sector. The heavy machinery had struck the first load-bearing pillar, and the dust was about to billow out into the open street. Cornered manipulators follow a highly predictable playbook. When the private channels of extortion are closed, they invariably reach for a megaphone. By Tuesday morning, Harper had pivoted from a panicked tenant into a public martyr. She understood she possessed no legal standing, no financial leverage, and no moral high ground. Therefore, she manufactured a crisis of optics. She weaponized the digital town square, seeking to shame me into compliance through the sheer force of suburban gossip. I discovered her broadcast while sitting in my leather armchair, reviewing the daily municipal bond yields on my tablet. A fellow board member at the country club forwarded me a link accompanied by a brief, concerned note. I tapped the screen and watched my daughter-in-law execute a masterclass in performative suffering. She had posted a 5-minute video to a private network of local Westport mothers, a digital enclave that immediately bled into broader community forums. The production value of her breakdown was remarkably deliberate. She filmed herself sitting on the floor of the half-finished nursery, ensuring the camera angle perfectly captured the peeling edges of the imported Italian wallpaper I had ordered her to remove. The room lighting was dim, casting long, sorrowful shadows across her face. Her makeup was artfully smudged to suggest hours of weeping, yet her hair remained flawlessly styled. She spoke in a trembling whisper, looking directly into the lens, spinning a narrative of profound betrayal and systemic cruelty. She told her captive audience that her father-in-law, a wealthy and powerful local figure, was arbitrarily rendering a pregnant woman homeless over a minor, polite disagreement regarding party invitations. She used trendy psychological buzzwords, labeling my withdrawal of funding as financial abuse and coercive control. She painted a vivid picture of a vulnerable young family cast out into the harsh coastal winter. The crowning irony of her performance was her chosen wardrobe. She wore a thick, cream-colored cashmere sweater adorned with delicate pearl buttons. I recognized the garment instantly. I purchased it for her in Aspen last December at a boutique she dragged me into, paying $900 without a second thought because she claimed the cold mountain air was drying out her skin. She was using my own luxury gifts as the costume for her poverty pantomime, shedding tears over a financial crisis while wrapped in high-end knitwear. By Tuesday afternoon, the digital ripple had transformed into a tangible wave across my social circles. I maintain a strict routine which includes a late lunch at the Cedar Ridge dining room every Tuesday. I did not alter my schedule to accommodate her tantrum. I drove my sedan to the club, handed the keys to the valet, and walked through the double oak doors. The shift in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Conversations at nearby tables dropped an octave as I walked past. Eyes darted toward me over crystal water goblets and stiff linen napkins. The Westport elite thrive on the scent of scandal, especially when it involves one of their own appearing to violate the sacred code of familial duty. I felt the collective judgment of men and women who hide their own infidelities, bankruptcies, and miserable marriages behind pristine, manicured hedges. I took my usual table by the window, ordered a rare steak, and ate in perfect, unhurried silence. I do not require the approval of hypocrites, nor do I alter my behavior to appease a rumor mill. My son, however, lacked my thick skin. Liam called me just as the waiter cleared my plate. His voice was frantic, pitched high with the unique terror of a man whose reputation is his only currency. He works in corporate marketing, an industry where perception dictates reality and optics are treated as gospel. The video was a catastrophe for his carefully managed image. Colleagues were sending him sympathetic texts. His inbox was flooding with unsolicited advice from extended family members who had not spoken to us in a decade. He begged me to reinstate the housing arrangement. He did not ask this because he believed Harper was right, nor did he ask because he felt a sudden entitlement to the property. He pleaded because he was suffocating under the crushing weight of the public embarrassment. He wanted me to write a check to purchase his salvation from the local gossip circuit. He promised that if I just let them stay in the penthouse, he would force Harper to apologize, to take the video down, to issue a public retraction blaming her pregnancy hormones. I listened to the desperation rattling in his lungs. I told him he was attempting to extinguish a grease fire with a bucket of water. I explained that capitulating to public blackmail guarantees a lifetime of future extortion. Once you pay the ransom for your reputation, the kidnapper simply raises the price for the next hostage. I refused to fight his wife in the mud of social media. A seasoned developer never argues with the protesters holding signs outside the construction site. The developer simply owns the land beneath their feet, secures the municipal permits, and lets the excavators do their work. I advised Liam to turn off his phone, face the reality of his fractured household, and prepare for the upcoming move. Harper, monitoring the situation from her contested penthouse, quickly realized her digital tears had failed to open my vault. The video garnered sympathy, but sympathy does not pay a coastal mortgage or halt a legal eviction. Frustrated by my stoicism, her anger curdled into a reckless, vindictive desperation. If the court of public opinion could not break my resolve, she decided to invoke the power of the state. Late that evening, my attorney Marcus called me on my secure home line. He possesses an extensive network of contacts within the county municipal offices, a byproduct of decades spent navigating zoning boards and civil courts. He informed me that a high-priority, anonymous tip had just been logged with the Connecticut Department of Adult Protective Services. The report alleged that Jamison Wells was suffering from rapid, severe cognitive decline. It claimed I was exhibiting paranoid delusions, acting erratically, and destroying my own estate to the detriment of my dependents. The author of the tip was, undeniably, Harper. She believed she had executed a brilliant tactical strike. In her mind, triggering a state investigation would entangle my assets in an impenetrable web of bureaucratic red tape. She assumed an ongoing inquiry into my mental competence would force a judge to freeze all eviction proceedings until my sanity could be legally verified by government-appointed doctors. She thought she was buying herself months of free rent under the guise of elder protection. She failed to comprehend the severity of the machine she had just switched on. Filing a false report with a government agency, particularly one designed to protect vulnerable citizens, is not a clever negotiation tactic. It is a profound legal liability. She believed she was throwing sand into the gears of my eviction process. Instead, she had just handed me the precise, undeniable evidence of malice required to shatter her entire defense. The battle was no longer a simple landlord dispute. She had invited the authorities to inspect the foundation, unaware that my blueprints were flawless, and her own structure was about to face a catastrophic inspection. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, not via a bonded courier, but through standard certified mail. The return address belonged to a strip mall legal clinic, wedged somewhere between a discount dry cleaner and a chain pharmacy in a neighboring town. The letterhead was printed on low-grade paper that felt coarse between my fingers, a stark contrast to the thick, watermarked parchment my own legal counsel utilizes. Harper had managed to secure representation, likely finding the most eager, inexperienced litigator willing to take a retainer without conducting a rudimentary background check on the opposing party. I did not open it immediately. I placed the envelope on my mahogany desk and finished my morning review of the municipal bond markets. A seasoned developer never lets a disruption dictate his schedule. When Marcus arrived at my estate an hour later for our scheduled weekly briefing, I handed him the sealed document. Marcus is a man whose tailored suits cost more than the retaining fee this opposing counsel likely charged. He possesses a razor-sharp intellect and a profound intolerance for amateur hour theatrics. He sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener, adjusted his reading glasses, and began to scan the contents. Within 30 seconds, a low, genuine chuckle rumbled in his chest. He slid the pages across the smooth wood of my desk. The document was a formal cease and desist order, though it read more like a ransom note drafted by a petulant teenager. The opposing attorney had outlined a list of demands that defied basic civil jurisprudence. The first demand required the immediate reinstatement of the canceled Platinum credit cards. I read the paragraph twice just to ensure my eyes were not deceiving me. They were attempting to use the threat of litigation to force a private citizen to reopen a revolving credit line for a third-party dependent. It was a laughable assertion. Treating my personal banking infrastructure as a public utility, Harper had a constitutional right to access. The second demand insisted I immediately halt all eviction proceedings against the waterfront penthouse. The attorney cited undue medical hardship, claiming the stress of relocating would endanger the pregnancy. However, they failed to attach a single physician's affidavit or medical diagnostic report to substantiate the claim. The law operates on empirical evidence, not dramatic adjectives and self-diagnosed trauma. Marcus pointed out the structural flaws in their argument immediately. A month-to-month tenancy at will can be terminated for any reason, and lacking a high-risk medical diagnosis from a licensed obstetrician, her demand was merely hot air masquerading as a legal shield. The third demand was the most audacious. They requested a lump sum payment to compensate Harper for the profound emotional distress caused by my abrupt financial withdrawal. They quantified her suffering with a staggering dollar amount, arguing that the sudden loss of her expected lifestyle constituted a deliberate infliction of psychological harm. This was extortion, plain and simple, dressed up in the formatting of civil litigation. She was demanding a six-figure payout as a penalty for being denied a free luxury apartment and unrestricted access to my wealth. The final paragraph contained the veiled threat she believed would force my capitulation. The attorney referenced the impending birth of my grandchild, employing specific, calculated phrasing regarding grandparent alienation. The letter suggested that failing to meet these financial demands would result in the permanent severance of my relationship with the unborn child. They were holding future visitation hostage, attempting to leverage an infant to secure a real estate portfolio. I looked up from the cheap paper and met Marcus's eyes. We did not rage, we did not shout or pound our fists against the desk. We shared a quiet, knowing smile. Connecticut family law concerning grandparent visitation is famously complex, requiring a high burden of proof regarding existing relationships and the child's best interests. But no judge in the state will ever mandate visitation in exchange for a cash settlement. Extorting a grandfather for a luxury lifestyle under the threat of alienation is a tactic that deeply offends the sensibilities of family court magistrates. Their legal foundation was built entirely on sand, and the tide was already rushing in. I asked Marcus how he wished to draft the reply. He steepled his fingers, his expression turning clinical. He advised that we offer no response whatsoever. Silence is a weapon. When a cornered opponent throws a desperate punch in the dark, you do not turn on the lights to show them where you are standing. You let them swing at shadows until they exhaust themselves. We would not dignify their extortion with a formal reply. We would let the deadline on the eviction notice continue to tick down, an invisible clock echoing in the background of Harper's panicked mind. Furthermore, engaging in a back-and-forth correspondence would only generate billable hours for both sides. By remaining a blank wall, we forced Harper to carry the financial burden of her own anxiety. Every time she called her strip mall lawyer to complain about my lack of response, the meter would run. She would purchase her own frustration at $300 an hour. This brought me to the most critical calculation of the day. How had a woman with no independent income managed to secure legal representation? She had no liquid assets of her own. The answer was a simple matter of arithmetic, and it exposed a fatal vulnerability in her strategy. Harper drew the $5,000 retainer directly from Liam's primary checking account. My son earns a respectable corporate salary as a marketing director. It is a wage designed to support a comfortable, middle-class existence. It was never intended to shoulder the burden of imported Italian aesthetics, country club dues, and leased luxury SUVs. For 3 years, my automated monthly deposits had acted as an invisible dam, holding back the floodwaters of their exorbitant spending habits. My capital covered the excess, creating an illusion of boundless prosperity. With those deposits abruptly terminated earlier in the week, Liam's checking account was transformed into a shallow puddle evaporating under a blistering sun. That single wire transfer to the law firm drained the exact buffer required to clear their upcoming auto loan payments and utility drafts. Harper believed she was executing a masterful opening chess move against a seasoned grandmaster. She thought hiring an attorney projected strength and intimidation. In reality, she was stripping the armor off her own king to purchase a wooden sword. She pushed her husband's finances to the precipice of ruin, ensuring that when Liam finally reviewed his banking application, the resulting shockwave would shatter the walls of their marriage from the inside out. She was bankrupting her own household to fight a war she could never win. While she sat in the penthouse refreshing her email inbox, waiting for a terrified capitulation that would never arrive, my focus shifted. The luxury condo, the canceled credit cards, and the absurd cease and desist letter were mere skirmishes. They were distractions designed to test my resolve. A tactical developer looks past the immediate noise of the construction site and surveys the most valuable terrain on the board. She had threatened my access to the unborn child, assuming the infant was her ultimate leverage. She forgot that I already controlled the primary financial vehicle designed to secure that child's future. It was a vehicle she frequently boasted about to her social circle, a status symbol she wielded with profound arrogance. I reached for my phone, ready to initiate a transfer that would permanently eradicate her final remaining source of leverage, moving the ultimate prize far beyond her greedy reach. 2 years ago, during a crisp afternoon much like the one currently falling over my estate, Liam and his wife visited me for Sunday dinner. Over roasted duck and a rather excellent bottle of Bordeaux, my son nervously announced their intention to begin trying for a family. Evelyn had been gone for nearly a decade by that point, and the prospect of a new generation carrying our legacy forward filled the dining room with a rare, genuine warmth. I decided to commemorate their milestone with a foundational gift. The following Monday, I opened a Connecticut Higher Education Trust account, a standard college savings vehicle. I seeded the portfolio with $250,000. My intent was to allow compound interest to work its quiet magic over 2 decades, ensuring my future grandchild would never graduate carrying the crippling burden of student loans. I informed Liam of the deposit, advising him to keep the information private. Discretion, however, is a foreign language to his spouse. Harper treated the educational portfolio not as a sacred academic safeguard, but as a glittering social accessory. She quickly weaponized the account within her peer group. She loved dropping the phrase liquid Ivy League fund into casual conversations at the tennis club, utilizing my capital to elevate her own status among women who judged each other by the thickness of their trust funds. She fundamentally misunderstood the structural reality of the financial instrument she boasted about. A standard college savings plan is not a joint checking account. It is not an unmonitored slush fund accessible for private school tuition or upscale tutoring services. More importantly, the individual who opens and funds the account remains the sole legal custodian. I held the exclusive right to alter the investment strategy, change the designated beneficiary, or liquidate the holdings entirely. Harper assumed the money belonged to her child, and by extension, to her. She was tragically mistaken. On Wednesday morning, Marcus arrived at my Westport residence, bearing a thick leather folio. We sat across from one another in my study, the scent of dark, roasted espresso mingling with the old paper of my archives. We were undertaking a tactical asset relocation. Leaving the funds in the original account presented a distant yet unacceptable risk. If I were to pass away unexpectedly, the custodianship could theoretically transition to Liam, which meant Harper would eventually find a way to bleed the principal dry. I refused to leave such a glaring vulnerability in my blueprints. I instructed Marcus to liquidate the entire $250,000 portfolio. Dissolving the account incurred a 10% federal penalty on the generated earnings, alongside state tax obligations. In the realm of commercial real estate, we call this the cost of doing business. Paying a minor penalty to the Internal Revenue Service is a minuscule toll to cross the bridge into impenetrable, generational security. Marcus slid a fresh stack of legal documents across the smooth mahogany surface. We were transferring the remaining balance directly into a generation-skipping, irrevocable trust. This specific legal vehicle is the financial equivalent of a titanium vault buried beneath a mountain. Once the ink dried on the signature line, the capital would cease to belong to me, and it would remain forever beyond the grasp of my son and his wife. Marcus was appointed as the sole executing trustee. The bylaws were drafted with ruthless precision. The trust would sit dormant, accumulating interest, until my grandchild reached the age of 18. At that juncture, the funds could only be dispersed directly to an accredited university's billing department. Harper could not touch a single cent. She could not borrow against it, she could not manage it, and she could not use it to purchase maternal prestige. I uncapped my fountain pen, a heavy brass instrument Evelyn had gifted me, upon the completion of my first commercial high-rise. The gold nib scratched against the thick parchment, leaving a permanent, indelible trail of black ink. With 3 signatures, I erased Harper's favorite talking point from existence. While I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my study, securing my descendants' academic future, a starkly different scene was unfolding 30 miles away. I learned the precise details of her afternoon excursion later, pieced together from the digital footprints of rejected transactions and the inevitable rapid gossip of boutique clerks who cater to our specific social strata. Harper had driven her leased, luxury sport utility vehicle down to Greenwich Avenue. Her ego was bruised from the social media backlash, and the suffocating silence following her strip mall lawyer's extortion attempt had left her feeling dangerously unmoored. She required a quick, transactional hit of dopamine to stabilize her facade. She needed to purchase something expensive to prove to herself that her affluent reality was still intact. She parked outside an exclusive infant emporium, a boutique featuring plush velvet carpets and the faint, curated scent of imported lavender. She glided through the aisles, running her manicured hands over organic cotton garments and hand-carved wooden toys. She cornered a young sales associate, speaking loudly enough for the other affluent patrons to hear. She boasted about her incoming nursery, the waterfront penthouse, and the liquid Ivy League fund waiting for her unborn child. She constructed a towering monument to her own financial superiority, right there beside the display windows. She selected a $1,200 imported stroller, an unnecessarily complex piece of equipment featuring rose gold accents and a leather-wrapped handle. She approached the marble checkout counter with the haughty confidence of royalty collecting a tithe. The sales associate rang up the merchandise, folding the stroller into a branded canvas garment bag. Harper reached into her designer tote and produced her heavy metal debit card. This was the card tied directly to Liam's primary checking account, the very same account she had drained 24 hours prior to pay her cut-rate attorney's retainer. She handed the card over, her chin tilted upward, expecting the familiar, comforting chime of an approved transaction. The associate swiped the metal through the terminal. The machine paused, processing the encrypted data, before emitting a sharp, discordant beep. A stark red message flashed across the digital screen: insufficient funds. The clerk, trained in the delicate art of managing wealthy, easily offended clients, lowered her voice to a discreet whisper. She politely informed Harper that the card had been declined by the issuing institution. She asked if there was perhaps an alternate method of payment she might prefer to use. The color vanished from Harper's face. The physical sensation of her entire world tilting off its axis must have been dizzying. She snatched the card back, her hands shaking visibly, insisting the machine was malfunctioning. She dug through her wallet, her breathing growing shallow and rapid. Pulling out the secondary platinum credit card, she thrust it toward the clerk, demanding she run the alternative plastic. The terminal swallowed the chip. It beeped again. Account closed. The silence in the boutique grew thick and suffocating. The other patrons, women who had just moments ago been the target audience for her arrogant boasting, now offered her looks of profound, devastating pity. Harper stood frozen under the warm glow of the recessed lighting. The realization crashed into her chest with the weight of a falling steel beam. The bottomless well of my capital was truly, undeniably dry. Her husband's account was empty. Her backup credit lines were severed. She possessed no liquid cash, no tangible equity, and no ability to purchase the $1,200 stroller she had just claimed was a basic necessity. She could not maintain eye contact with the sales associate. The humiliation was total, a public unmasking of her hollow existence. Without a word of explanation, she turned on her heel and fled the boutique. She left the rose gold stroller sitting on the marble counter, abandoning her dignity alongside it. She practically ran to her vehicle, slamming the heavy door shut and gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. The drive back up the coast to the Westport penthouse must have been a blur of mounting terror and blinding rage. Her survival instincts dictated that she could not internalize this failure. She required a scapegoat, someone to absorb the shockwave of her own reckless spending. She could no longer direct her fury at me, insulated as I was behind ironclad trusts and high-priced litigators. The only target left within her reach was the man whose signature she required to keep the crumbling roof over her head. She sped toward the condo, prepared to unleash a tempest upon my son, entirely unaware that the empty bank accounts she was about to scream about would finally force Liam to open his eyes and stare directly at the ledger of his own ruined marriage. The machinery of the state operates with a notoriously sluggish rhythm. Unlike a bonded courier or a private wealth manager who executes commands in a fraction of a second, government agencies require time to process their paperwork. 7 days had passed since Harper placed her anonymous, desperate phone call. On a brisk Thursday morning, the slow churn of the Connecticut bureaucracy finally arrived at my front door. I was in the conservatory pruning a rather stubborn bonsai tree when the gate intercom chimed. The security feed displayed a nondescript domestic sedan idling at the perimeter. 2 individuals emerged, displaying state credentials to the camera lens. They were agents representing the Department of Adult Protective Services. I pressed the release button, granting them access to the long, winding driveway. They parked near the stone fountain and approached the heavy oak double doors. I met them in the grand foyer, wiping my hands on a crisp linen towel. The lead investigator was a tall, weary-looking man with salt and pepper hair, carrying a thick clipboard. His partner was a younger woman, her eyes darting around the polished marble floors and the vaulted ceilings, clearly attempting to reconcile the pristine environment with the chaotic report they had been dispatched to investigate. The lead investigator introduced himself as Mr. Harrison. He utilized the careful, practiced tone of a professional accustomed to navigating delicate, often volatile family dynamics. He explained that his office had received a priority alert regarding my welfare. The anonymous informant alleged that I was exhibiting severe signs of cognitive deterioration. The report painted a grim portrait of an elderly man suffering from paranoid delusions, acting erratically, and recklessly dismantling a lifetime of acquired wealth. According to their file, I was a danger to myself and an active threat to the financial stability of my dependents. I did not interrupt his recitation. I listened with the quiet respect one affords a public servant executing a difficult duty. When he finished, he asked if they might come inside to conduct a preliminary interview and assess my living conditions. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the formal sitting room. The space is immaculate, bathed in natural light, filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, devoid of dust or clutter. I asked them to take a seat on the leather sofa and offered them a warm beverage. I walked into the kitchen and retrieved a silver serving tray, placing 3 cups of Evelyn's favorite bone china upon it. My late wife cherished that specific porcelain set, having acquired it during an anniversary trip to London decades ago. She always said that serving a guest on fine china forces a conversation to elevate itself above common hostility. I poured hot, dark roast coffee from a thermal carafe, ensuring not a single drop spilled onto the polished silver. I carried the tray into the sitting room and placed it onto the glass coffee table with steady, unwavering hands. Mr. Harrison accepted the delicate cup, his gaze tracking my deliberate, precise movements. He was searching for tremors, for confusion, for the subtle markers of neurological decay his mandate required him to identify. He found nothing but cold, engineered stability. I sat in the armchair opposite them, crossing my legs, and retrieved a thick-bound folder from the mahogany side table. My attorney Marcus and I had compiled this dossier days in advance, anticipating this exact visit. I handed the document to the investigator. I told him I respected the gravity of his position, and I intended to provide total transparency to expedite his inquiry. He opened the heavy cover. The first page was a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation conducted a mere 48 hours prior by the foremost neurologist in Fairfield County. The diagnostic scores ranked my cognitive function in the top percentile for my demographic. The second document was a certified copy of a recent brain scan demonstrating impeccable vascular health and zero evidence of degenerative disease. Mr. Harrison flipped to the third section, and the true nature of his visit materialized before his eyes. It was a meticulous, itemized ledger chronicling the past 3 years of my daughter-in-law's spending habits. The spreadsheet highlighted the boutique maternity photo shoots, the country club dining tabs, the luxury lease payments, and the astronomical cost of the canceled Italian nursery furniture. The final entry displayed the exact time and date she had drained her husband's checking account to secure a strip mall litigation attorney. The silence in the sitting room stretched as Mr. Harrison digested the empirical data. The young woman beside him peered over his shoulder, her initial professional curiosity souring into distinct, visible revulsion. They were trained to protect the elderly from predatory exploitation. As they reviewed the ledger, the roles inverted. They realized they were not sitting in the home of a deteriorating victim. They were sitting in the fortress of a man who had simply decided to stop funding his own financial parasite. The investigator closed the folder, setting it down beside his untouched coffee. The weariness in his posture shifted into a rigid, professional disgust. He understood instantly that his agency had been weaponized by a greedy heir attempting to orchestrate a bureaucratic hostage situation. Mr. Harrison stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. His tone lost the gentle, placating edge he had arrived with, replaced by a crisp, legal formality. He apologized for the intrusion, stating unequivocally that the department harbored zero concerns regarding my competency or my capacity for independent living. As I escorted them back toward the foyer, the investigator paused near the threshold. He looked at me, his expression hardening into grim solidarity. He lowered his voice, delivering a statement meant only for my ears. He noted that submitting a fraudulent claim to Adult Protective Services is not merely a waste of municipal resources. It is a severe misdemeanor carrying significant penal consequences, including steep fines and potential criminal prosecution. I thanked him for his diligence and watched the domestic sedan disappear down the long driveway. The trap Marcus and I engineered had snapped shut flawlessly. Harper's desperate attempt to summon an external authority had backfired, transforming her anonymous tip into a documented record of undeniable malice. She possessed no money, no credit, and now a looming legal liability she could not begin to comprehend. Her external armor was stripped away entirely. She was currently speeding back to the waterfront penthouse, vibrating with the fresh humiliation of her declined card at the infant boutique. She was racing home to demand salvation from Liam, unaware that the very bank accounts she had hollowed out were waiting to greet him. The blast doors were sealed shut, and the pressure within their fragile marriage was about to breach a critical, devastating threshold. I am a man who relies on verifiable data. I do not guess the structural integrity of a building, and I do not speculate on the private conversations happening behind closed doors. The events that unfolded inside the waterfront penthouse that Thursday evening were not observed through a window. They were relayed to me weeks later by my son. He sat across from me in my study, a hollowed shell of a young executive, recounting the exact moment his marriage fractured beyond repair. He described the scene with the agonizing precision of a witness testifying at a tribunal. It was the evening the illusion of his prosperity finally met the unforgiving anvil of mathematics. For 3 years, Liam had avoided looking at the household ledgers. He allowed his wife to manage the daily expenditures, trusting her constant assurances that they were living comfortably within their means. He operated under the naive assumption that his corporate salary as a marketing director was the primary engine driving their lifestyle. My invisible, automated monthly deposits were the silent grease keeping the gears turning, padding their accounts just enough to prevent the checks from bouncing. With those deposits eradicated, the engine seized. Liam returned home from the office that evening, his shoulders tight with the creeping dread of unpaid invoices. The 30-day eviction notice I had served him rested on the court's kitchen island, a ticking legal time bomb demanding immediate logistical answers. He opened his laptop and pulled up their joint banking application. The screen displayed a series of stark, negative balances. Seeking clarity, he downloaded the raw transaction data for the past 12 months, dropping the figures into a blank spreadsheet. He spent 2 hours categorizing the outbound cash flow. The resulting summary was a terrifying portrait of financial hemorrhage. Their monthly burn rate hovered just above $14,000. His take-home pay barely covered half of that figure. The line items on the screen were a testament to unearned indulgence. The monthly lease payment for her imported sport utility vehicle rivaled a standard suburban mortgage. The recurring charges for artisanal meal delivery services, organic dry cleaning, specialized prenatal fitness instructors, and premium salon memberships drained thousands of dollars before groceries were even considered. The math of modern coastal living is unforgiving when the invisible safety nets are removed. Harper returned to the penthouse just after 7 o'clock. She was exhausted from the profound humiliation at the infant boutique, carrying the fresh sting of a declined debit card and a shattered social standing. She walked into the kitchen, dropping her designer tote onto the counter, expecting her husband to soothe her bruised ego. Liam did not greet her with the usual comforting platitudes. He did not ask about her day. He simply turned the laptop screen toward her. He presented the spreadsheet. He spoke with a quiet, terrifying clarity, informing her that they were functionally bankrupt. He laid out a survival plan. It was a pragmatic, necessary strategy to avoid total ruin. He told her they needed to surrender the luxury vehicle back to the dealership and accept the early termination penalty. He suggested packing their belongings and relocating to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town, far away from the coastal prestige and exorbitant prices of Westport. He explained that by eliminating the superficial expenditures, they could slowly rebuild a genuine, sustainable foundation before the child arrived. It was the proposal of a responsible partner attempting to salvage his family from impending disaster. Harper did not see a responsible partner. She saw an obstruction to her aesthetic reality. Her reaction was not one of shared concern or cooperative problem-solving. It was a visceral, raw explosion of entitlement. She rejected the numbers glowing on the screen. She shrieked that she could not be expected to endure the trauma of a residential downgrade. She claimed a less prestigious zip code would ruin her social standing, isolate her from her peer group, and cause irreversible damage to her mental health. She paced the length of the kitchen, her voice reaching a shrill, piercing pitch, weaponizing her pregnancy as an impenetrable shield against financial accountability. As the reality of the spreadsheet cornered her, she lashed out physically. She swept her arm across the kitchen island in a blind fit of rage. Her hand struck a tall, hand-blown glass vase resting near the edge. It was not a generic piece of home decor purchased from a catalog. Evelyn had gifted that specific vase to Liam on his 21st birthday. It was a delicate heirloom she had acquired during a trip to Venice, carrying decades of maternal sentiment. The glass tipped over the edge and shattered against the hardwood floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sharp crash of breaking glass silenced the room. Liam stared at the fractured remnants of his mother's memories scattered across the floorboards. He looked up from the debris and locked eyes with the woman standing across the counter. In that fleeting, silent moment, The blindfold he had worn for 3 years slipped away entirely. He no longer saw the polished, charming woman he had stood beside at the altar. He saw the stark, ugly truth underneath the cashmere sweaters and the curated social media smiles. He recognized her not as a life partner dedicated to building a shared future, but as an organism that had attached itself to his lineage strictly for sustenance. He was watching a parasite panic at the sudden, unexpected loss of its host. The cognitive dissonance evaporated, leaving behind a cold, nauseating clarity. Harper stepped over the broken glass, her chest heaving with ragged breaths. She realized her tears and her screaming were no longer bending his will. His eyes were blank, stripped of the usual compliance she relied upon. She shifted her tactics, adopting a tone of venomous instruction. She told Liam that accepting a downgrade was an act of profound weakness. She pointed a trembling finger at him, demanding he act like a man and defend his territory. She commanded him to hire a formidable litigation firm. She instructed him to file an injunction against my eviction notice and to sue his own father for what she deemed his rightful inheritance. She insisted that my estate owed them a permanent, elevated lifestyle, and if I refused to provide it willingly, they must extract it through the judicial system. She demanded he wage war against his own blood to subsidize her comfort. Liam stood in the center of his ruined kitchen, listening to the mother of his future child plot a hostile financial takeover of his family's legacy. He did not argue with her. He did not agree to her demands. He simply turned away, walked to the utility closet, grabbed a broom, and began sweeping up the shattered Venetian glass in heavy, defeated silence. His refusal to engage in her fantasy signaled the final death knell of their partnership. But Harper was incapable of surrender. Driven by the sheer terror of impending poverty and the loss of her curated image, she decided to bypass her husband entirely. If Liam would not lead the charge against my estate, she would drag them both toward the courthouse on her own. She retreated to the guest bedroom, locking the door behind her. She spent the remainder of the night scouring the internet, searching for a legal maneuver desperate enough to halt my heavy machinery, intent on leveraging the family court system to force open my vault. The machinery of desperation operates at a frantic, reckless speed. When the illusion of an affluent reality fractures, a cornered individual will grasp at any available lifeline, regardless of how fragile the rope might be. Harper had locked herself inside the guest bedroom of the waterfront penthouse following her disastrous confrontation with Liam. Surrounded by the ruins of her financial security and the shattered remnants of my late wife's Venetian glass vase, she sought a digital miracle. She scoured the internet through the early morning hours, hunting for a loophole that would force my hand. She found her supposed savior in the form of the same heavily advertised legal clinic she had retained earlier in the week. By Friday afternoon, the result of her late-night plotting arrived at my estate. I was in the library, organizing a collection of architectural blueprints when the doorbell chimed. The individual waiting on my porch was not a bonded corporate courier, but a weary process server holding a thick stack of stapled documents. I accepted the delivery, signed the attached clipboard, and carried the paperwork back to my desk. The document was an emergency injunction filed in the county family court. Harper's cut-rate attorney was petitioning a magistrate for a temporary restraining order to halt the impending eviction. The legal maneuvering was astonishing in its sheer audacity. Because Liam had refused to participate in her hostile takeover, Harper filed the petition as the sole aggrieved party, utilizing her status as a pregnant resident to bypass his required consent. I read through the specific allegations. The petition claimed that executing the 30-day notice to vacate would cause irreparable medical harm to a delicate gestation. Furthermore, it leaned heavily on the fabricated narrative she had been broadcasting across her social networks. Her attorney formally cited my recent actions as erratic behavior, suggesting that the sudden termination of her housing and credit lines was the result of a severe, unmonitored psychological crisis on my part. They were asking a judge to freeze the eviction indefinitely until my mental competency could be evaluated by the state. Harper believed she had executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. She assumed that deploying the vocabulary of mental illness and maternal distress within a legal filing would automatically grant her months of rent-free sanctuary. She thought she was trapping me in a labyrinth of judicial red tape. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. When I read the allegations aloud to him, my senior litigation attorney did not express concern. I heard the distinct sound of a man suppressing a dry, predatory chuckle. A seasoned lawyer finds a unique joy in facing an opponent who overplays a weak hand. Marcus informed me that the opposing counsel had committed a fatal strategic error. By formally entering allegations of my mental instability into the public court record, they had opened the door for us to introduce our own empirical evidence. Marcus drafted our response over the weekend. We did not merely file a standard defense requesting the dismissal of her injunction. A developer does not swat away a trespassing pest. He reinforces the perimeter and prosecutes the intruder. We filed a brutal, comprehensive counterclaim. We sought formal judicial sanctions against both Harper and her legal representation for engaging in frivolous litigation. We demanded they be held financially liable for every dollar I spent defending against their baseless petition. To support this counterclaim, Marcus attached a single, devastating piece of evidence. It was labeled Exhibit A. Exhibit A was the official, certified report generated by the Department of Adult Protective Services just days prior. Harper had initiated that investigation anonymously, hoping to quietly tie my hands. Instead, she had forced a state agency to document my flawless psychological health, my pristine living conditions, and her own documented history of financial parasitism. The state investigator had literally written the defense we needed, stamping it with an official government seal. By attempting to weaponize the bureaucracy against me, she had handed us the exact shield required to deflect her courtroom assault, and the sword needed to strike back. The hearing was scheduled for an expedited slot on Wednesday morning, owing to the emergency nature of her filing. On Tuesday evening, the night before we were to appear before the magistrate, I felt the need to leave the quiet confines of my estate. I retrieved a heavy wool overcoat from the hall closet and drove my sedan through the winding, darkening streets of Westport. The autumn wind was biting, carrying the sharp, damp scent of dying leaves and approaching frost. I turned through the wrought iron gates of the local cemetery, parking near a grove of ancient weeping willows. The grounds were silent, illuminated only by the pale light of a rising moon. I walked up the gentle slope toward Evelyn's resting place. Her headstone is a solid slab of polished charcoal granite, simple and unadorned, reflecting the quiet strength she embodied during her life. Dry, brittle oak leaves had blown across the grave, piling up against the base of the stone. I knelt on the cold earth and brushed the debris away with my bare hands, clearing the carved letters of her name until they were visible in the moonlight. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I welcomed the sensation. It grounded me. I rested my palm against the freezing granite and let the memories of our shared history wash over me. I thought about the first decade of our marriage, a blur of sleepless nights, calculated risks, and unwavering mutual support. I remembered Evelyn, sitting at a cramped kitchen table in our first tiny apartment, a single desk lamp illuminating a stack of unpaid bills. She never complained about the lack of luxury. She never demanded a lifestyle we had not yet earned. She understood that security is constructed through patience and sacrifice, not extorted through entitlement and tantrums. We built an empire together. Every commercial property, every balanced ledger, and every asset in my portfolio was infused with her discipline. As I knelt in the biting wind, I made a silent vow to the woman buried beneath the frost-hardened soil. I promised her that the foundation we poured with our own hands would remain secure. I would not allow our life's work to be pillaged by an interloper who viewed our legacy as a simple clearance sale. I would protect Liam, even from his own willful blindness, by severing the toxic anchor dragging him downward. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my trousers, and pulled my coat tighter against the chill. The fear and anxiety that often precede a courtroom battle were entirely absent. I felt only the cold, mechanical certainty of a foreman preparing to execute a scheduled demolition. Across town, inside the waterfront penthouse she was desperately fighting to keep, Harper was likely spending her evening standing in front of a mirror. She was undoubtedly selecting the perfect outfit for the morning, testing various expressions of tragic maternal distress, rehearsing the trembling cadence of her voice. She believed the courtroom would be a theatrical venue, a stage where her performative tears and curated aesthetic could effortlessly manipulate the sympathies of a judge. She operated under the delusion that optics could override empirical reality. She was walking into an ambush of her own making. The dawn would bring a harsh, unforgiving education. She was about to learn that the justice system is a blind, grinding machine that operates strictly on documented paper, verifiable facts, and undeniable truth. Tears hold no currency when the ledger is balanced against you, and the gavel was already waiting to fall. The Fairfield County Courthouse is a monolithic structure of gray concrete and worn linoleum, designed for municipal efficiency rather than human comfort. It is a building immune to charm, where the stale air smells faintly of industrial floor wax and nervous sweat. I arrived at 8:45 alongside Marcus. We bypassed the murmuring crowds shuffling through the metal detectors and took our seats at the heavy oak defense table inside courtroom 4. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, monotonous hum, casting harsh, unflattering shadows across the judicial bench. It was an environment perfectly engineered to strip away illusions. 10 minutes later, Harper pushed through the swinging wooden doors. Her entrance was a carefully choreographed performance designed for maximum visual impact. She wore a simple, unadorned navy dress, a stark departure from her usual rotation of designer labels, styled specifically to project the image of a fragile, embattled young mother. She walked down the center aisle with a slow, exaggerated gingerliness, clutching a modest handbag to her chest. Her strip mall attorney trailed close behind her, looking visibly out of his depth as he fumbled with a disorganized stack of manila folders. Liam entered a moment later, pointedly choosing not to sit at the petitioner's table alongside his wife. He took a solitary seat in the second row of the public gallery. His face was drawn, his posture rigid, bearing the hollowed-out expression of a man walking to a mandatory execution. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Helen Croft took her seat upon the elevated bench. She was a woman in her late 60s, possessing a stern, angular face and a long-established reputation for treating the law as an exact, unforgiving science. She did not tolerate courtroom theatrics, and her patience for poorly prepared legal counsel was notoriously non-existent. She adjusted her reading glasses, opened the heavy case file, and instructed Harper's attorney to present his argument for the emergency injunction. The lawyer stood, buttoning a suit jacket that fit him poorly across the shoulders. He cleared his throat and launched into a meandering, highly emotional appeal. He spoke of his client's delicate physical condition, the impending birth of a child, and the alleged cruelty of a sudden, unexpected eviction. He attempted to paint me as an unstable patriarch inflicting intentional trauma upon a defenseless woman. He utilized a vocabulary rich with buzzwords, leaning heavily on terms like sanctuary, emotional endangerment, and psychological distress. Judge Croft listened for exactly 3 minutes before she raised a single, silencing hand. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing through the attorney's bluster. She asked a simple, structural question. She demanded to see the lease agreement, the recorded property deed, or any verified financial document proving his client held a shred of equity in the waterfront penthouse. The lawyer stammered, shuffling his disorganized papers across the table. He admitted, his voice dropping an octave, that no such documentation existed. He attempted to pivot back to the narrative of my supposed mental decline, reiterating his request for a medical hold on the eviction proceedings to protect his client from my erratic choices. Judge Croft turned her attention to the defense table. Marcus stood up. He did not raise his voice, nor did he offer any emotional counter-arguments. He operated with the cold, measured precision of a surgical strike. He handed the bailiff a pristine, indexed binder. He directed the judge to tab 1, which contained the certified deed for the property, proving undeniable ownership by Wells Holdings, LLC. He pointed to tab 2, the digital signature confirming receipt of the 30-day notice to vacate. He established the indisputable reality of a month-to-month tenancy at will, executed perfectly within the bounds of state law. Then Marcus moved to the counterclaim. He informed the court that we were seeking severe financial sanctions against the petitioner for filing a frivolous, bad faith injunction. He directed Judge Croft to tab 3, Exhibit A, The courtroom fell dead quiet as the judge read the official report generated by the Department of Adult Protective Services. I watched her eyes track across the page. I watched her absorb the neurologist's flawless cognitive evaluation, the clean brain scan, and the meticulous ledger detailing Harper's exorbitant spending habits. The state investigator had documented the undeniable truth. The petitioner was not fleeing a dangerous elder. She was a financial dependent attempting to weaponize a government welfare agency to orchestrate a rent-free hostage situation. Judge Croft lowered the document. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When she spoke, her voice cracked like a whip, echoing across the silent gallery. She directed her wrath entirely at Harper and her cowering attorney. She stated that the family court exists to protect the genuinely vulnerable, not to serve as an extortion mechanism for entitled residents lacking a lease. She admonished the attorney for filing a petition devoid of legal merit, relying solely on unverified slander. Then, her gaze locked onto Harper. The judge condemned her decision to file a false report with the state welfare agency, calling it a reprehensible abuse of the system that actively diverts critical resources away from citizens in actual peril. The ruling was swift and unmerciful. Judge Croft denied the emergency injunction with prejudice, meaning the petition could never be refiled. She explicitly upheld the legality of the 30-day eviction notice, confirming the clock remained active. Furthermore, she granted our counterclaim in full. She ordered Harper to pay the entirety of my legal fees incurred for defending against the frivolous filing. Before striking her gavel, Judge Croft delivered a final, chilling warning. She looked directly into Harper's eyes and advised her that any further attempts to manipulate the judicial system or any future fraudulent reports submitted to state agencies would result in an immediate referral to the district attorney for criminal perjury charges. The gavel fell with a sharp, hollow crack. The hearing had lasted exactly 22 minutes. I remained seated at the defense table, observing the psychological collapse of my opponent. Harper sat frozen in her wooden chair. The curated, fragile facade she had worn into the building shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The designer makeup she had so carefully applied began to smudge around her eyes as genuine, terrified realization set in. She understood, in the harsh fluorescent lighting of that courtroom, that her performative tears possessed zero currency here. The legal system operates on paper, on verifiable facts, and on undeniable truth, none of which she possessed. She slowly turned her head, looking over her shoulder toward the public gallery. She was seeking the comforting, compliant gaze of her husband. She was searching for the man who had always shielded her from the consequences of her own actions. Liam sat 2 rows back, his hands resting flat on his knees. He did not offer her a reassuring nod. He did not rush forward to console her. He simply stared back at her with eyes as cold and hard as river stones. He had just watched his wife sit under oath and listen to a judge verify her lies. He had seen the state report detailing her calculated attempt to have his own father declared legally incompetent. The mask had peeled away entirely, revealing the desperate machinery underneath. The silence passing between them in that gallery was the sound of a marriage drawing its final breath. Marcus closed his binder, signaling the conclusion of our business. We stood, gathered our coats, and exited the courtroom without glancing back. We left Harper sitting at the plaintiff's table alongside an attorney she could no longer afford to pay, facing a mountain of court-ordered legal fees she had no means to satisfy. The legal blockade was cleared. The eviction timeline resumed its relentless countdown. They had exactly 8 days left to vacate the waterfront penthouse before the county sheriff arrived to physically remove their belongings and change the locks. Stripped of my financial backing, denied her judicial miracle, and facing the chilling, unresponsive stare of her husband, Harper realized she was entirely isolated. Her local resources were drained dry. The fortress walls were closing in rapidly. Panic necessitates a savior. And having exhausted all avenues within the borders of Connecticut, she reached for her phone the moment she stepped out of the courthouse doors. She was calling in her last remaining line of defense, summoning the very people who had taught her the architecture of entitlement. Sunday mornings at my estate are typically reserved for quiet reflection, a pot of dark roast coffee, and a thorough review of the weekly financial periodicals. However, when you construct an impenetrable perimeter, those excluded will inevitably attempt to breach the gates using whatever blunt instruments they possess. The instrument Harper chose to wield on this particular Sunday arrived in the form of a silver, late-model Mercedes sedan. It crept up my long, winding driveway just past 10 o'clock, its tires crunching aggressively against the pristine gravel. I watched their approach from the tall bay windows of my study. The occupants were Richard and Eleanor Sutton, Harper's parents. They are individuals who dedicate their entire existence to the maintenance of a very specific, highly polished suburban illusion. Richard is a man who wears expensive golf shirts tight across the chest, projecting an aura of effortless prosperity. Eleanor is a woman held together by rigid posture and frequent, costly cosmetic interventions. They had trained their daughter in the precise art of projecting wealth without the necessary foundation to support it. I did not have my security detail turn them away. When a cornered opponent sends in their reserves, you do not lock the door. You invite them inside and expose the futility of their rescue mission. I opened the heavy oak front doors before Richard could press the brass bell. He stood on the porch, his face flushed, attempting to arrange his features into a mask of righteous, patriarchal indignation. Eleanor stood half a step behind him, clutching a designer handbag like a shield, her expression drawn tight with manufactured concern. Richard did not offer a polite morning greeting. He bypassed standard social protocols and launched directly into his rehearsed offensive. He utilized a booming, aggressive tone, a tactic commonly employed by men attempting to mask a profound lack of actual leverage. He demanded to know how I could justify throwing a pregnant woman out into the cold. He invoked the sacred duties of family, insisting that a proper grandfather would never inflict such trauma upon an innocent, unborn child. He accused me of being vindictive, of utilizing my vast wealth as a weapon to bully a young couple navigating the stressful waters of impending parenthood. I allowed him to exhaust his vocabulary of moral outrage. I did not invite them into the sitting room, nor did I offer them a warm beverage. We remained in the grand foyer, the marble floor cold beneath our feet, the acoustics of the vaulted ceiling amplifying the hollowness of his demands. When he finally paused to draw a breath, I spoke. I did not raise my voice to match his bluster. A man who holds the title deed does not need to shout. I informed Richard that I was not punishing a child. I was severing a parasite. I turned, gesturing for them to follow me into my study. They trailed behind, their initial aggressive momentum slightly derailed by my absolute lack of emotional response. I walked behind my heavy mahogany desk, opened the top right drawer, and retrieved a thick, stapled document. I had Marcus compile this specific dossier the day after the courtroom victory, anticipating exactly this desperate parental intervention. I handed the stack of papers across the desk to Richard. He took it hesitantly, his eyes darting toward Eleanor, uncertainty flickering behind his manufactured bravado. I instructed him to read the top page. It was a consolidated summary of the luxury travel and leisure expenses his daughter had billed directly to my secondary platinum card over the preceding 6 months. The total figure sat just above $18,000. The ledger detailed a long weekend at a 5-star resort in Cabo San Lucas, a string of premium spa days in Manhattan, and a chartered coastal yacht excursion she claimed was necessary for prenatal relaxation. I looked Richard directly in the eyes. The flush of righteous anger had rapidly drained from his face, replaced by a pale, sickening realization. I told him with absolute frigid clarity that I was not endangering my grandchild. I was protecting my lineage from his daughter's catastrophic spending habits. I was ensuring that the wealth Evelyn and I built would not be incinerated to fund a bottomless pit of aesthetic entitlement. Eleanor leaned over, attempting to read the figures over her husband's shoulder. Her rigid posture sagged slightly as she absorbed the undeniable evidence of her daughter's financial gluttony. They had likely been fed a narrative wherein Harper was a frugal, persecuted victim of a tyrannical billionaire. The paper in Richard's hands eradicated that illusion completely. Richard attempted to mount a weak defense, stammering that young couples occasionally make minor budgetary mistakes, and that eviction was a disproportionate, draconian response. He urged me to reinstate the housing arrangement, promising he would personally speak to Harper about reining in her expenditures. This was the moment I chose to reveal the fatal flaw in their rescue mission. I leaned forward, resting my palms flat against the smooth wood of my desk. I hold a considerable amount of influence within the local commercial banking sector. I possess an acute awareness of the financial currents flowing beneath the surface of our affluent community. I told Richard that if he was genuinely, profoundly concerned about the impending homelessness of his pregnant daughter, the solution was remarkably simple. I suggested he drive back to his own sprawling colonial estate. I advised him to clear out his expansive guest suite and welcome his daughter and son-in-law into his own home. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard blustered, his jaw working silently, searching for a polite excuse to decline my generous suggestion. Eleanor averted her gaze, suddenly fascinated by the intricate pattern of my Persian rug. They could not take Harper in. I knew, with absolute certainty, that the Suttons were quietly, desperately bankrupt. Their colonial estate carried a massive, high-interest secondary mortgage. The silver Mercedes idling in my driveway was heavily leased. Their country club membership was currently suspended due to 90 days of unpaid dues. They were drowning in the very same debt-fueled illusion they had passed down to their daughter. They had arrived at my gates hoping to shame me into reopening my vault, because they knew they lacked the capital to catch Harper when she inevitably fell. They needed me to continue subsidizing her lifestyle, so they would not be forced to bear the crushing weight of her entitlement themselves. I watched the realization wash over Richard. He understood that I saw straight through his tailored golf shirt and his leased luxury sedan. I saw the empty ledgers and the looming collection notices. He held no moral authority, and he possessed zero financial capability to intervene. I did not press the issue further. I simply extended my hand, indicating the door. Richard placed the stack of papers back onto my desk. His shoulders slumped, the manufactured patriarch persona crumbling into the reality of a defeated, overextended debtor. He turned and walked out of the study without uttering another word. Eleanor followed closely behind him, her designer bag offering no protection against the sheer humiliation of the encounter. I watched them drive away, their departure far quieter than their arrival. The perimeter was now totally secure. Harper had deployed her final reserve troops, and they had retreated in total disarray. She was completely, undeniably isolated in that waterfront penthouse. She possessed no legal recourse, no financial backing, and now, no familial sanctuary to fall back upon. The stage was finally set. With the external noise eliminated and the false narratives destroyed, it was time to address the core of the rot. It was time to pull my son out of the wreckage and show him the exact dimensions of the prize his wife had sacrificed their marriage to capture. I picked up my phone and dialed Liam's number. I invited him to lunch at my private club. He needed to understand the true magnitude of his wife's miscalculation, and I was holding the blueprints she had spent a year desperately searching for. It was Tuesday, mere days before the county sheriff was scheduled to enforce the writ of possession at the waterfront penthouse. The legal clock had nearly expired. I instructed Liam to meet me for a late lunch at the Cedar Ridge dining room. The midday rush had subsided, leaving the mahogany-paneled room quiet, save for the faint clinking of crystal and the hushed murmurs of the remaining patrons. I sat at a secluded corner booth, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching the entrance. When my son walked through the arched doorway, the toll of the preceding weeks was etched deeply into his physical frame. His tailored suit hung loosely from his shoulders, suggesting a recent, rapid drop in weight. The skin beneath his eyes was bruised with exhaustion, a dark, purplish testament to countless sleepless nights. He did not carry the confident stride of a rising corporate executive. He moved with the slow, mechanical stiffness of a survivor navigating the smoldering wreckage of a collapsed structure. He slid into the leather booth opposite me. The waiter approached, pouring a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, sensing the heavy gravity of our table and retreating swiftly. We sat in silence for a long moment. Liam stared at the curling steam rising from his cup. He possessed the hollowed-out look of a man who had finally stopped fighting the tide and was simply waiting for the water to pull him under. He informed me, his voice barely above a whisper, that the packing process had begun. He had secured a month-to-month lease on a modest studio apartment in a neighboring working-class district. He spoke of renting a moving truck, boxing up his own belongings, and the deafening silence currently reigning inside the penthouse. Harper, he noted, spent her days locked in the guest bedroom, refusing to assist with the logistics of their impending departure, consumed by her own localized tragedy. I listened to his grim logistical update. I did not offer pity, because pity does not rebuild a ruined foundation. Empirical truth rebuilds a foundation. I reached into my leather briefcase resting on the adjacent seat and withdrew a thick, spiral-bound legal folio. I slid the heavy document across the polished oak table. The cover page bore the seal of my primary law firm and a bold, formalized title: The Evelyn Wells Neonatal Trust. Liam stared at the letters, his brow furrowing in confusion. He reached out, his fingertips tracing the embossed seal. He opened the cover and began to read the executive summary. I watched his eyes scan the dense, esoteric legal terminology. To comprehend the gravity of the document in his hands, one must understand the philosophy Evelyn and I shared regarding inherited wealth. We observed our peers handing their children unearned fortunes, only to watch those descendants drown in a sea of idle entitlement. We vowed never to inflict such a curse upon our own lineage. Years prior, long before her passing, we sat with Marcus and restructured the entirety of my commercial real estate holdings. We transferred the vast majority of our life's work, a portfolio valued at $14 million, into an ironclad, irrevocable philanthropic vehicle. The trust was designed to perpetually fund neonatal intensive care units across the state of Connecticut. We chose that specific cause because Evelyn believed the only individuals truly deserving of a free, unearned rescue were premature infants fighting for their first breath. We wanted our legacy to build hospitals, not fund country club memberships for heirs who had never poured a foundation of their own. I allowed Liam to digest the preamble before I explained the specific mechanics dictating his own future. I told him the $14 million principal was permanently locked, shielded from any private withdrawal. It belonged to the charity. However, the bylaws contained a highly specific provision for his welfare. Upon reaching his 40th birthday, the trust would begin dispensing a generous, tightly managed annual living stipend. The disbursements were structured to ensure he would never experience poverty in his later years, providing a secure floor to stand upon. Crucially, the legal framework explicitly classified the stipend as non-commingled, protected inheritance. Under the strict parameters of Connecticut family law, a spouse possesses zero legal claim to those specific assets, even in the event of a divorce. Liam slowly closed the folio. The magnitude of the revelation was processing through his exhausted mind. He realized the vast, glittering empire he thought he stood to inherit was a phantom. I took a sip of my water, ensuring my tone remained clinical and detached. I needed him to understand the tragic irony of his ruined marriage. I revealed a piece of security data I had kept hidden for over a year. I informed him that my home surveillance system had captured several troubling incidents during their weekend visits. On 3 separate occasions, while Liam and I were occupied on the golf course or walking the grounds, Harper had slipped into my private study. I described watching the security footage. I watched her manicured hands systematically searching my desk drawers and rifling through my locked filing cabinets. She was hunting for my last will and testament. She operated under the arrogant assumption that marrying my only child guaranteed her immediate, eventual access to an 8-figure liquid fortune. She endured my presence, smiled at my dinner table, and curated her flawless social media narrative while waiting for the day my heart stopped beating. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, forcing him to meet my gaze. I told him she was never going to get the empire. I explained that she had burned our family to the ground, alienated her father-in-law, and humiliated herself in a public courtroom, all to secure a piece of a pie that simply did not exist. The final puzzle piece locked into place behind his bruised eyes. The cognitive dissonance that had sustained his denial evaporated entirely. He saw Harper not as a demanding, aesthetically driven partner, but as a calculated prospector who had dedicated 3 years to mining an empty claim. She had destroyed her own life chasing a mirage. He sat back against the leather upholstery, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The realization was devastating, yet it carried the undeniable, cleansing power of absolute truth. He pushed the folio back toward me, offering a quiet nod, acknowledging the protective barrier his mother had envisioned. We finished our coffee in a new, profound silence. It was the silence of two men standing on the other side of a brutal storm, surveying the cleared terrain. Liam stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, his posture noticeably straighter than when he had arrived. He stated he needed to return to the waterfront penthouse to finalize the packing process before the sheriff arrived. He planned to box up his home office, separate his personal documents, and prepare for his transition to the studio apartment. I watched him walk out of the dining room. He believed the worst of the revelations were behind him. He thought the loss of the estate and the collapse of his wife's gold-digging fantasy was the final, bitter truth of his marriage. He drove back to the condo seeking closure. He had no idea that while sorting through his wife's desk later that evening, he would uncover a hidden leather binder exposing a betrayal far more profound than mere greed. A discovery, waiting in the dark to shatter the final, remaining illusion. I spent the remainder of that Tuesday evening in my study, watching the coastal fog roll in off the Sound. The damp chill seeped through the window panes, mirroring the cold reality settling over my son. Liam had returned to the waterfront unit shortly after our lunch concluded. He intended to execute a quiet, orderly extraction of his personal effects. He purchased a stack of flattened cardboard boxes from a local hardware supply store, carrying them up the elevator with the solemnity of a pallbearer. The penthouse was shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. Harper remained barricaded inside the guest suite, nursing her perceived wounds and plotting her next futile maneuver. Liam decided to begin his packing process in the small alcove designated as their shared home office. It was a pragmatic choice, an attempt to secure vital tax records and birth certificates before tackling the emotional minefield of the master bedroom. He sorted through the filing cabinets, placing folders into labeled cartons. When he reached Harper's writing desk, a sleek piece of mid-century modern furniture, he found the top drawers empty, save for stray pens and expensive, unused stationery. The bottom drawer, however, resisted his pull. It was locked. A 3-year marriage builds a certain degree of operational knowledge. Liam knew she kept a spare brass key hidden inside a ceramic decorative bowl on the adjacent bookshelf. He retrieved the key, slid it into the lock, and turned the cylinder. The drawer slid open smoothly on its metal tracks. It did not contain the expected assortment of household receipts or prenatal appointment schedules. It held a single, thick portfolio bound in dark green leather. Liam lifted the portfolio. It possessed a suspicious, undeniable weight. He carried it to the kitchen island, spreading the contents out under the bright pendant lights. What he discovered within those pages was not mere financial mismanagement. It was a meticulously orchestrated, felonious betrayal. The documents bore the official letterheads of prominent lending institutions. They were executed contracts for multiple home equity lines of credit. The collateral listed on the paperwork was the sprawling, heavily mortgaged colonial estate belonging to Richard and Eleanor Sutton. The Suttons possessed terrible credit scores and zero liquid capital. No reputable bank would approve them for secondary loans without a solvent guarantor. Liam traced his finger down to the signature line on the final page of the most recent lending agreement. Staring back at him was his own name, executed in a flawless, practiced script. Harper had forged his signature. She committed identity theft against her own husband, legally binding him as the primary co-signer on hundreds of thousands of dollars of her parents' toxic debt. The depth of the conspiracy expanded as he turned the pages. Tucked behind the loan contracts were printed email chains exchanged between Harper and a local interior architect. The correspondence discussed a comprehensive redesign of the penthouse floor plan. She was not just building a nursery. She was requesting quotes to convert the formal dining room into an additional master suite, explicitly stating the renovation was required to accommodate her aging parents. The architectural blueprints exposed her ultimate endgame. She planned to leverage the birth of the child as an emotional anchor, moving her bankrupt mother and father into the luxury condo the moment they returned from the hospital. Liam was designated to be the sole financial beast of burden. He would be trapped in an overcrowded apartment he did not own, working endless corporate hours to service the fraudulent debt she had chained to his Social Security number, while her family lived a life of subsidized leisure. The revelation did not trigger a shouting match. Betrayal of this magnitude transcends common anger. It breeds a cold, clinical execution. Liam gathered the forged contracts and the architectural blueprints. He walked down the hallway and knocked firmly on the guest bedroom door. Harper opened it, her face arranged into a mask of weary, victimized patience. She expected him to apologize for the lunch meeting, to offer a compromise, to fold under the pressure of her sustained silent treatment. Liam did not speak a word of greeting. He simply handed her the green leather portfolio. He watched her eyes dart downward, recognizing the binding. The remaining color drained from her face, leaving her features hollow and stark. The oxygen seemed to vanish from the corridor. She attempted to snatch the papers back, stammering the beginnings of a frantic, incoherent defense. She claimed it was a temporary measure, a desperate necessity to save her parents from foreclosure, insisting she planned to tell him once the baby arrived. Liam cut through her frantic rationalizations with a tone I had taught him to use during high-stakes contract negotiations. He informed her that the marriage was officially terminated. He stated he would be retaining a premier divorce attorney the following morning. He outlined his legal strategy with devastating precision. He would present the forged lending documents to a family court judge, utilizing her documented felonious fraud to secure primary physical custody of the infant. He told her she was an unfit partner, a criminal liability, and a parasite he was surgically removing from his life. Stripped of her leverage, caught in an undeniable web of federal financial crimes, the polished facade she had spent decades cultivating imploded. Harper devolved into a state of feral, unrestrained panic. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound devoid of any aristocratic pretense. She darted past Liam, running directly into the half-finished nursery. The room was her temple of aesthetic superiority, the physical manifestation of the illusion she prized above human connection. She turned her rage upon her own idol. She grabbed the edge of the custom-imported Italian wallpaper she had spent weeks agonizing over. She dug her manicured nails into the seams and pulled. The heavy, hand-painted paper tore away from the drywall with a loud, sickening rip. She tore at it again and again, sobbing hysterically as she shredded the expensive floral patterns, leaving jagged, ruined strips hanging from the plaster like peeling skin. Liam stood in the doorway, watching her destroy the only thing she truly valued. He did not attempt to restrain her. He allowed her to exhaust herself in the wreckage of her own making. When her breathing slowed to ragged gasps, she dropped the torn paper onto the floorboards. Liam pointed toward the front door. He told her she had exactly 15 minutes to pack a single suitcase and vacate the premises. If she refused, he would dial the local precinct and hand the forged loan documents directly to an arriving patrol officer. The threat of immediate incarceration broke her remaining resistance. She packed a designer duffel bag with trembling hands, her movements clumsy and rushed. She ordered a rideshare service through her mobile application. 10 minutes later, without uttering a final goodbye, she walked out of the penthouse. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind her. At 11 o'clock that evening, my desk phone rang. It was Liam. His voice was exhausted, drained of all emotion, yet anchored by a profound, undeniable sense of relief. He recounted the discovery, the forgery, and the departure. The parasite had been excised. The poison was drained. The structural demolition was complete, and the arduous, quiet work of clearing the debris was about to commence. 6 months is a brief period in the lifespan of a commercial building, yet it is ample time to clear the rubble of a demolished marriage. The harsh coastal winter thawed into a mild Connecticut spring, bringing with it a methodical legal reckoning. I did not involve myself directly in the divorce proceedings. Liam utilized the premier family law attorney I recommended, presenting the forged loan documents and the architectural blueprints to the presiding judge. The court views financial fraud perpetrated against a spouse with profound distaste. The magistrate did not care about curated social media feeds or tearful narratives. The judge focused strictly on the undeniable evidence of identity theft and predatory debt allocation. The resulting decree was a testament to the cold efficiency of the justice system. The financial consequences from our prior skirmishes had finally come due. The judge who denied her emergency injunction had ordered her to pay my attorney fees, a sum that had grown substantial during Marcus's rigorous defense. Because she possessed no liquid cash and her parents were entirely insolvent, the family court mandated the liquidation of her personal assets to satisfy the debt. The designer maternity sweaters, the imported leather handbags, the expensive jewelry she flaunted at the country club. Every piece of her armor was appraised, cataloged, and auctioned. She was stripped of her aesthetic currency. She retreated to the heavily mortgaged colonial estate belonging to Richard and Eleanor Sutton. She was relegated to their cramped, drafty guest bedroom, surrounded by the crushing financial ruin she had attempted to force upon my son. The parasite had tried to consume the host, and in doing so, had starved itself. My grandson arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in early May. I was not banned from the hospital wing. There was no dress code required to view the newborn, nor was there a hired photographer hovering in the corner attempting to capture an artificial moment. I stood shoulder to shoulder with my son in the maternity ward, looking through the thick glass of the viewing window. The infant was swaddled in a simple cotton blanket, sleeping soundly under the warm, fluorescent lights. Liam placed his hand against the glass. The heavy, bruised exhaustion that had characterized his posture for half a year was replaced by a quiet, terrified reverence. He was a father now, standing on solid ground. The infant's mother was located in a different wing of the hospital, recovering under a strict set of court-ordered parameters. She was denied primary physical custody, granted only supervised visitation, dictated entirely by Liam's discretion and the infant's welfare. Rebuilding a structure after a controlled demolition requires patience. You cannot pour fresh concrete over unstable soil. Liam spent his first weeks of fatherhood navigating the arduous logistics of infant care in his modest studio apartment. He did not ask for a handout. He paid his own rent, purchased his own groceries, and learned to function without the invisible safety net of my automated deposits. He earned his independence through sleepless nights and stark discipline. He discovered the profound difference between the appearance of prosperity and the quiet dignity of self-reliance. When the child was a month old, Liam called me. He asked if he might bring his son to the estate for the weekend. They arrived on a Friday afternoon. The summer sun was warm, casting golden light across the manicured lawns and the long gravel driveway. I met them at the front door. Liam carried the infant carrier in one hand and a small canvas overnight bag in the other. He did not look like a man pretending to be wealthy. He looked like a tired, capable father. We walked through the grand foyer, the acoustics of the vaulted ceiling softening the small, quiet sounds of the sleeping baby. The estate felt different today. The vast, empty hall seemed to anticipate the arrival of a new generation. I did not lead him to the formal sitting room where I had dispatched the state investigators. I guided him down the east hallway, toward the guest wing overlooking the rose gardens Evelyn had planted decades ago. I stopped in front of the final door on the left. I reached out and turned the brass handle, pushing the heavy wood inward. I stepped aside, allowing my son to enter the room first. During the late winter months, I had instructed my groundskeeper and a local carpenter to undertake a modest renovation. The walls were painted a soft, muted sage green, lacking any imported, hand-painted Italian wallpaper. The windows were framed by simple linen curtains that allowed the afternoon light to spill across the polished hardwood floors. The room contained a functional crib and a changing table I had sourced from a local craftsman. It was not a showcase designed to generate envy among country club acquaintances. It was a sturdy, quiet sanctuary built for rest. Sitting in the precise center of the room was the single item I had salvaged from the canceled boutique order. The vintage wooden rocking chair rested on the floorboards, its unvarnished slats and curved runners gleaming faintly in the sunlight. It was the exact replica of the chair Evelyn had utilized during the longest, hardest nights of our early parenthood. It carried the silent legacy of a woman who understood that true value is found in the labor of love rather than the price tag of the equipment. Liam stepped toward the center of the room, He set the canvas bag on the floor and gently lifted his sleeping son from the carrier. He approached the wooden chair, running his free hand along the curved armrest, recognizing the design immediately. He sat down, the wood creaking softly under his weight, and settled the infant against his chest. He pushed off the floor with the toe of his shoe, initiating a slow, steady rhythm. I stood in the doorway, watching the pendulum motion. I have spent my entire life evaluating investments, measuring risk, and analyzing the integrity of load-bearing walls. I know that aftercare is the most critical phase of any architectural project. You must monitor the curing concrete. You must inspect the joints. Rebuilding trust between a father and a son is a slow, unglamorous undertaking. It requires the deliberate, daily choice to rely on truth rather than comfortable illusions. As the afternoon light caught the edge of the wooden rocker, I listened to the quiet, rhythmic breathing of my grandson. I looked at the dark circles under my son's eyes and the genuine, unforced peace settling over his features. The false facade was gone, scraped away by the harsh friction of reality. The ground beneath us was cleared of debris. I watched Liam rock his child in the very same chair Evelyn had rocked him in, and I knew, with undeniable certainty, that the foundation we were building now would finally last. There is a profound, almost tragic paradox at the heart of modern American parenting. We spend the first half of our lives breaking our backs, stripping the drywall of our youth, and pouring concrete foundations so that our children will never have to know the biting cold of real scarcity. We want to give them the world, but in our desperate, loving rush to shield them from the very struggles that forged our own character, we often inadvertently strip them of the strength required to survive. We hand them the keys to the penthouse without ever teaching them how to read a blueprint. This is the quiet, creeping rot that takes hold in so many affluent families today, and it is the exact decay that I had to surgically excise from my own bloodline. When we look at the wreckage of my son Liam's marriage to Harper, it is easy to view it simply as a tale of a gold digger thwarted and an estate protected. But to reduce it to a mere financial victory is to miss the terrifying mirror it holds up to our culture. Harper was not an anomaly. She was the inevitable product of a society that has confused credit limits with actual wealth and curated aesthetics with genuine substance. She was raised in the hollow echo chamber of modern entitlement, where the appearance of prosperity is worshipped above the discipline required to achieve it. But Harper's entitlement could only flourish because it found a willing host, and that host was my son. That is the hardest, most agonizing truth a parent must swallow. I had to look at Liam, exhausted, anxious, drowning under a $14,000 monthly burn rate, and realize that my silent, automated financial subsidies were not helping him build a life. They were simply funding his paralysis. In my desire to give him a stable start, I had become the architect of his prison. I had mistaken financial enabling for paternal love. Within the traditional framework of a family, responsibility is not merely about providing warmth and food. It is about guarding the gates. It is about protecting the generational legacy, not just the bank accounts, but the profound moral code upon which those accounts were built. My late wife, Evelyn, and I did not construct a $14 million real estate portfolio by demanding a stress-free vibe from the world. We built it on calloused hands, instant ramen eaten on subfloors, and an unwavering commitment to each other's survival. Fairness, in the context of raising and guiding children, does not mean giving them whatever they ask for to keep the peace. Fairness means honoring the sacrifices of the past by refusing to let them be squandered in the present. When Harper texted me, banning me from my own grandchild's celebration because my physical presence ruined her aesthetic, she wasn't just being rude. She was declaring war on the foundation of our family. She was demanding the fruits of our labor while attempting to erase the laborers. To have turned a blind eye, to have swallowed my pride and kept writing checks just to maintain access to my grandson would have been a profound betrayal of Evelyn's memory. More than that, it would have been a betrayal of Liam. It would have taught him that disrespect is an acceptable price to pay for comfort. There is a dangerous misconception today that emotional awareness means prioritizing comfort above all else, that to be emotionally intelligent is to avoid causing distress at any cost. I reject that entirely. True emotional awareness is possessing the horrifying clarity to see when a loved one is living inside a burning building, and possessing the sheer, ruthless courage to strike the match that burns their false facade down. When I canceled the platinum cards, when I halted the $28,000 nursery order, and when I sent that bonded courier at 6 in the morning with an eviction notice, I was not acting out of malice. I was acting out of a desperate, agonizing paternal duty. I was initiating a controlled demolition. I knew it would cause chaos. I knew it would publicly humiliate Harper and bring immense, immediate pain to my son. But sentimentality has no place when a load-bearing wall is collapsing. You cannot save a drowning man if you are too afraid of making waves. I had to let Liam feel the freezing water of his own reality so that he would finally learn how to swim. It is a harsh reality to face, the idea that sometimes the monster in the story is actually the one holding the checkbook, waiting for the precise moment to snap it shut to save a life. If you find yourself recognizing these quiet, toxic dynamics in your own family tree, or if you believe that respect must be earned rather than purchased, I encourage you to subscribe to Savage Revenge Stories. We share these narratives not just for the thrill of the climax, but because studying the anatomy of these family fractures teaches us how to rebuild. The climax of our story wasn't the courtroom victory, nor was it the exposure of Harper's sickening financial forgery. The true climax was the quiet aftermath. It was the Tuesday afternoon at my private club when I handed Liam the Evelyn Wells neonatal trust documents. It was the moment I looked my son in the eye and told him the brutal, unvarnished truth. The empire he thought he was going to inherit, the empire his wife had sacrificed their marriage to steal, did not exist for them. Honesty is the heaviest burden a parent carries. It would have been infinitely easier to let him believe the safety net was endless, to let him coast on the assumption of future wealth. But by showing him the trust, I set him free. I removed the target from his back. I gave him the greatest inheritance a father can offer, the absolute necessity of his own resilience. When he brought my grandson to the estate months later and rocked him in Evelyn's vintage wooden chair, I did not see a wealthy heir coasting on my accomplishments. I saw a man. A man who had finally learned the weight of his own existence. We are heavily conditioned to believe that a parent's ultimate job is to provide continuous, unyielding comfort. We are sold the narrative that love is a soft, warm blanket meant to shield our children from the harshness of the world forever. But standing in the wreckage and watching my son rebuild, I have come to realize a darker, more vital truth. Sometimes the most profound act of love a parent can commit is to become the villain in their child's story. To save them, you must be willing to tear down the very walls you built to protect them. You must be willing to let them hate you, to let them misunderstand your motives, and to let them hit the unforgiving concrete of rock bottom. Because it is only there, in the cold, uncurated ruins of their own failures, that they will ever find the raw materials to construct a life of their own. As I watch Liam rock his son in the quiet light of my home, I am left to wonder, did the demolition come in time? We cleared the rot, and the new foundation feels strong today. But the soil of modern life is always shifting, and the true test of any structure is not how it stands in the warm sunlight, but whether it holds when the next storm inevitably breaks.